everyone, to today's episode of Be Freaking Awesome. I am one of your hosts, Sammy Kinnison, here with Angela Belford. Last week, we talked about having a relationship with yourself and why that was so important. This week, we're going to talk about what probably was expected whenever I teed up last week, the relationship with others and why it matters to work on that and how it can impact us. Angela,
Yes,
opening
because,
remarks.
well, yeah, because like we talked about last week, I read The Good Life. You should read it. It's a good book. And they talk about that if you want a fulfilling life, the best indicator of a fulfilling life are good relationships. It's the relationships we have with people. And I will also say, after spending, like we talked about last time, a good amount of time helping two different people or being a part of the process of two different people's physical bodies leaving this earth, which is sort of how I've come to think about dying.
Well, I mean, not to be ticky here, but their physical body didn't leave the earth.
Oh, well, yeah, you're right. Gosh. Can you just like leave me alone for a minute?
Their spiritual bodies, I don't know. Keep going.
Also, over the last 2 months, being part of the process where two people's life was transitioning, they were dying.
I was like, we don't have to put flowery language on it. We can also.
No, but I've been thinking about it. Anyway, the bottom line is that it's kind of like they say, when you get to the deathbed, you're not wishing you'd spent more time at the office. You're not wishing you'd spent more time, chasing money. It really, really seriously is all about relationship. As your body begins to not be able to function, it is all about relationship. And so I'm excited to talk about it. And not only did I write about it in the book, we've done some episodes about relationships, but today I want to specifically talk about, my whole book is a lot about calming your nervous system down and completing emotional loops and all of those sort of things. And if you spend your whole life in a recluse cabin and you never talk to anybody else, you can probably keep a pretty calm nervous system. But when you venture out into the world and have these beautiful, fulfilling relationships, you're also going to get triggered. You're also going to have the opportunity for things to come up that are going to feel unpleasant for you. It's going to feel like you have taken your emotional remote control and handed it to someone else and let them push your buttons. And so we just want to talk about that today.
Feel like this is at the technology store where they have the little demo things, and somebody's hypothetical 5-year-old just walks up and says, like, what do these buttons do? What does this do? What's that? What's that? And then all the lights start turning on and off and the music gets real loud and you're like, stop hitting the buttons, people. Come on.
I don't know if that's the thing. I think more often what happens to me is that, like, I didn't even know there was a button that you could push and turn the lights on. I didn't know your Christmas lights, they go, ooh, and they spinny and flashy and things like, ooh, I didn't know my body could do that when you said those words to me. Like, what just happened? I feel a little bit more like how I think
Mostly I just was relating it to my real life experience of a 5-year-old in
I wonder if
technology store.
I wonder if there's a whole episode where we don't talk about your child.
He's a very big part of my life. Thank you very much. I just process everything through my child's eyes, which, do you want to know who I learned that from? Angela.
That would be Angela to you. We're going to talk about your children.
So anyway, relationships with others matter. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm in a snarky mood today. We're just going for it. I think
Wait, we're talking about relationships with others and you've got all the snark. I'm shocked.
No. I do think it is interesting though, because even though you can do, everything air quotes right, some human being is going to walk in the room and, your nervous system's going to respond, it's going to react. And that is a challenge that one really can't avoid in this life. Whether it is the toddler walking into your room, or your boss walking into the room, or your sibling who you fought with all growing up, or your best friend, all of those things are going to impact us. And how great and wonderful, like, that we feel things and that we are human and that we have people who can impact us in any way, positive or negative. That means we feel things and we're alive.
Yeah.
But what do we
Here's
do
the other
along the
thing.
way?
Here's something that I want to kind of tie into last week, but also I missed this point last week. And funny, the reason why I missed it is because this concept is in the relationship chapter. It's not in the relationship with yourself chapter. So that's kind of interesting, but whatever, we're going with it. So there is, in all major religions, faith perspectives, there is a concept that is love your neighbor as yourself. And so when we start talking about relationships, it makes sense that we are going to bring up love your neighbor as yourself. If you didn't listen to last week's episode, want to remind people that I think the most important words of that phrase are as yourself. And so it is important for us to love our neighbors 100%. And the more we settle our nervous system, complete emotional loops, and complete beliefs that have not served us, and shore up our beliefs, the easier this process with other people is going to be. And so if you're someone that has, like, I would love to be in a relationship, I'm scared to trust people, I'm scared because I've been hurt a lot, and so therefore I just want to encourage you that there's still hope for you.
So, still hope for you. Hope for what? Like, say more words.
Great question. Sorry, it made sense in my head.
It's not that it doesn't make sense. It's that I want you to say more words because I want to make sure I'm tracking right with you.
Yeah, well, I think that, well, what I said is if you're the kind of person that wants to be in relationships with people, but you've been hurt, so you're scared to be in relationships, you can actually, you don't have to live your life full of fear that you're going to be hurt again. You can learn to trust people again. And next week, we're actually going to talk about boundaries. So I guess this really is kind of a 3-part series on relationships inadvertently. But the thing is that there's hope, because the more that you shore up your own self-love, your own self-compassion, you actually shore up your ability to be in relationships with other people. Because if I believe that I don't belong, and that's my core belief, and that's how I see the world, then of course I'm going to walk around the world kind of stiff and feeling like I don't belong. And if you can resolve that I don't belong, and you can begin to belong to yourself, and you can stop abandoning yourself, then you actually can open yourself up again to be able to belong to others. And it's a resilience technique that will help you to be able to navigate and endure the storms of life that will come when you open yourself up to relationships. When you have other people in your life, they are going to disappoint you. They are going to hurt your feelings. They are going to also bring you so much joy and so much fulfillment and so much fun. And it's okay if today you feel like I can't possibly be in relationship with people because I have been so hurt that I'm forever damaged. It's just not the way it is.
This makes me also think about sort of the opposite extreme that I have seen as well, where somebody is so unsure in themselves that they seek relationship for that validation. And that the person who they're in, like particularly romantic relationships, I need that person to tell me that I am lovable. And I say this as that person being that person. Like, this has been me in my marriage, that I needed Chris to tell me that I was lovable, so that he loved me, so that I had the reassurance that I was lovable. And when he failed to respond to the request, do you love me? Then I wondered, am I lovable of myself? And when I can be wholehearted and have rock solid beliefs, regardless of the people around me, I can then have a better relationship with him, and that I am not needing him to fulfill these deep core needs in me. I have filled them myself. And that has made my marriage so much better because I didn't realize I was going to go here, but to be just really vulnerable, like the way that I would ask Chris, do you love me, was not the question, hey, Chris, do you love me? It was like, hey, Chris, can you spend time with me? Hey, Chris, do you want to have sex? Hey, Chris, can we go do this thing? Can we go out to eat together? And he might respond, oh, I've got work to do, or I'm tired tonight, or I don't know that there's money. We shouldn't go out. And then my brain was too afraid to ask the real question, do you love me? Then the pseudo question was actually answered no, because he might have had very legitimate logistical reasons to say no. And my brain was like, ah, great. This replacement question, does he love me, is no, he doesn't love me because he doesn't want to go out to eat tonight because he wants to save money. I'm not worth the money. Now I'm struggling with this core issue when there really may not be money in the bank account. Maybe we don't need to go out to eat. I don't, whatever it might be. And so when I can do my own work and be whole myself, I don't have to have somebody else to complete me to be able to go through this world. And I think that it's a hard concept to get if you don't get it. When you get it, you're like, oh yeah, I'm there right with you. But if you're like, I'm not quite sure I know what you mean, it's kind of hard to explain, to get to make it make sense. But my marriage is better because I'm not seeking my husband to complete me and to validate me all the time. I now get to just exist. And regardless of what I do, I know that I am lovable. I also know that he loves me, regardless of if we spend time together, if we have sex, if we go out to eat. And those can be surface level questions. They don't have to be deep core belief questions.
I love that so much. I heard recently someone say, when I am solid in myself, then when someone else does validate me, it's like the whipped cream and sprinkles on top. And I can still enjoy that. I can enjoy that there are whipped cream and sprinkles on top, but I'm solid in and of myself. And if I don't get that validation, I'm still enough. I'm still okay. I'm still lovable because you've solidified that. I love that. Beautiful. Thank you for being vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what would you recommend that we do in the face of relationships that might activate our nervous system?
So what I really want to talk about today are coping skills because, the book encourages you to get to a point where you can regulate your nervous system and things are going to pop up and you're going to be activated. And so what are some things that you can do to kind of reduce the tidal waves that are kind of coming up and also to surf the tidal waves because sometimes they're going to come up regardless of that. So the first one I want to talk about is emotions. Two things I want to talk about with emotions. Emotions are indicator lights. They are not an indictment. So even if someone says something and you get activated, that's not a problem. There's no problem with that because that is just letting you know, warning, it's no more dangerous necessarily than the gas light coming on to say you need to fill up your tank. So remember, they're an indicator. So when you get activated, when you have emotions, when you get really upset, they're an indicator. The second thing is emotions are real, but they may not be true. And this one's super hard. It's so nuanced of how you have to do this. When you are learning about emotions and just understanding emotions can help you cope better. And so understanding that an emotion, when you have a sensation in your body, it may not be based on the situation that you are in right now. I last week was able to get some additional training, and I love Victoria Song said, when you get triggered, it's almost like a time machine that takes you back to the first time you felt like that. And so when we say that they're real, but they may not be true, if you are in a situation at work and you suddenly feel powerless and you get super activated, it may not be related to this. Your body may have just time traveled back to the first time that you felt powerless. And that was actually in 5th grade when you were bullied, right? And so just because you're activated, and just because I want you to honor that and go, okay, what's happening with me? But it doesn't mean it's based on the facts of the situation that you're currently in. So I think that's the first coping skill.
I like it.
Related to understanding that emotions are, sensations in your body, they're indicator lights. The next thing is to begin to notice your thought patterns, because let me just review. I believe sensations get triggered before we even necessarily have a thought, because they're often based in an incomplete emotional cycle. However, I also have thoughts that contribute to how I feel about things. So the example I use is my husband. If I'm the one that normally cooks dinner, my husband decides to cook dinner, and there is a huge mess out when I get home after he has made dinner. I have a choice of how I want to think about it. I can be like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. You made me dinner. And that's going to generate a set of feelings and going to keep the emotion train, the feeling train, all the sensations going. Or if I say, oh my gosh, what a huge giant mess, then that is going to add fuel to a different feeling train and keep the sensations in my body activated. And so sometimes our thought patterns can be to our disadvantage.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that it's just really nuanced between the positive thinking sort of philosophy, recognizing that it's not to say that we think, all of positive thinking is just nonsense and doesn't mean anything. It's that it's just missing a piece. It's there, but it's like, yes, this is true that your thoughts can impact your worldview and how you're approaching things. And also you missed a key step. And without that key step, by presenting this positive thinking, just think about our thoughts. Sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it's not. And sometimes it is like, okay, we can say that's a thought that's floating in the river, and I'm going to let it just keep on floating by.
Right, because
Not going to grab it.
I tell the story of Barry and I were riding our bikes in San Francisco, and he was kind of racing ahead to the next thing. And I started telling myself this whole story about how he didn't want to be with me, and he didn't like it that he was this, that, and the other. And there was just a crazy amount of stories that were going in my brain that were then just adding fuel to the fire, versus he was thinking, no, I want to look at the map, and you don't like it when I put my phone back in my pocket. So I'm going to try to reduce your stress by doing this other thing. And so we don't often notice the consequences of what we're doing, or how somebody else will perceive those consequences, which gets into communication, I believe.
Yeah.
Next coping skill. This one's actually my favorite. Is, and it probably should be the last one. It is the last one in the book, but I'm going to bring it up earlier because I think that it's one of the most helpful ones. And that is, humans are saying sentences and we get to decide what they mean. So if someone says, oh my gosh, you are such a horrible mom, you get to decide what that means. If you don't have any inkling of a belief that you are a bad mom, you're probably going to be like, you're nuts. That's crazy town. But if you are a little bit nervous about something being true, then when somebody says words, you can start telling yourself a story and start getting yourself all ramped up, when in fact, it might be easier just to be like, this is a human. They are saying some sentences, they're saying some words, and I'm going to let them say some words and sentences until they stop saying sentences and I can get some clarity. It's hard but it's hard for me to like assume what people mean and assume that they're doing bad, that they have bad intent, and then activate myself all up and then trying to ask them calmly, is this what you meant by this? Do I do it all the time? Heck no, I don't.
So I was tracking with you. I was actually disagreeing with you until that last point. I don't think it's hard to assume that people have negative intent. I think that that's easy. I think that that is our natural inclination. It's hard to receive all of that and then ask them calmly, what did you mean? That part is hard for sure, but
I must have misspoke because yes, it is hard.
I was like, it's hard to just assume or to just say that they're saying sentences. And I think this is something that you say a lot. And it's really important to acknowledge that it's not an easy coping skill to acquire, because so much of relationships is valuing what people have to say, is listening to them, is respecting and caring about what's going on. I think this is more tied to when we talk about like somebody's throwing their emotional garbage at you, and you can choose to catch it and you can choose to let it fly by, and sometimes it will hit you. I think it is more aligned like with that idea that sometimes people are dealing with their own stuff going on, and they're going to say things towards you that has nothing to do with you. I saw a quote this morning that said, when you realize that projecting is one of the number one coping skills that people do, you really will understand it's not about you. And that the things that people say pretty rarely are actually about you. And when they're saying sentences to you and you're like, well, that's really hurtful, I think that you can learn a couple of things from it. We can, and by having our own beliefs rock solid in ourselves, that insulates us a little bit and gives us that gap to notice. It does not immediately come and like an arrow to the chest of like, oh my gosh, I feel so injured. You get to then be like, the arrow hits you and then bounces off. And it's like, they shot an arrow at me. Wonder what they're dealing with. I wonder if this was on purpose. I wonder if this was on accident. I wonder if they are hurt and flailing about, and hurt people, or is this somebody I need to set a stronger boundary with because they are purposely trying to tear me down? And having that insulation against yourself to say this is a human saying sentences gives you the chance to understand like what else is going on, trying to give that buffer.
I think also the idea that you're giving them some compassion in that response is you're just not automatically assuming that they're trying to be, because I can tell you there have been times where I employed this strategy and I still listened to what the person had to say. And then I said, so what I think I heard you say is XYZ. And they were like, oh my gosh, no. I was trying to give you a compliment. I was trying to ABC. Oh my gosh. And I was so grateful that I had just sat quietly and listened and went, is this what you meant to say? And I've had people be just horrified. Now, it doesn't always go well, because sometimes people affirm, that is what I meant to say. And you go, wow, that really was hurtful. And then that's a whole different set of coping skills that you need. But sometimes people they misspoke. And maybe they're like, we're running fast in their brain, and they were, maybe their thoughts were different places. Maybe they were hungry. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they just said the wrong word, or they thought this word meant a compliment thing and they swapped out a word. You know what I mean? And so I mean it not in the way of ignore what people are saying, but I mean it in the way of, you did a beautiful job of illustrating, just hang on.
I would also encourage that there are times when there is a pretty big difference in maturity or experience. I hesitate to use the word intelligence, but just people at different like levels and stages of life. So think like a teenager to their parent. Like teenagers are going to say a lot of things, and we can listen in for the truth of it and like what's the nugget in there, or we can get really caught up in probably the harm that is being thrown our way, and trying to just listen to be like, wow, they've got a lot of stuff going on right now. I don't know that we give teenagers enough credit for how much their brains are changing, and like the just hormonal barrage of everything that makes everything in front of you look like a saber-toothed tiger, whether it be the person who's cared for you your whole life or an actual saber-toothed tiger. It's just react defensively to everything. And so I think that knowing that there are going to be times where somebody may not be ill-intentioned towards you, and they may just not know enough yet to know that, wow, what they said actually is like, that's really mean and really rude. You probably shouldn't say things like that to other people if you want to have good relationships with them. So that, even because I think that if I remember where some of the strategy really started to get employed, might have been with some of your teenagers that you had. Yeah, teenage children specifically. So I think
Yeah,
it's probably, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure you had other practice in using that, but that is where some of the nuggets of this really blossomed,
sure.
is
I think
listening to
so.
teenagers.
And I can remember a conversation with that you and I had, and you were like, "Oh my gosh, that sibling of mine is being horrible." And I guess I'm going to call out which one it is based on what my response to you, which I was like, "Well, when you were in 8th grade, you sometimes said horrible things. When the other one was in 8th grade, they sometimes said horrible things. This person gets a turn to learn that they say horrible things, and that they're going to be some consequences, and they're going to have to learn." I think because teenagers are also, they're trying to stretch their boundaries. They're trying to figure out who they are. They're trying to like figure out how the world works. They're trying to like, I want more freedom. There's so many, besides all the biological things that you mentioned with the all of the brain activity that's going on. There's also like, who am I, and what am I about, and how do I put, what happens when I push that button? The lights come on. Oh my goodness, maybe I won't. And there, you hear stories all the time of people that are like, oh no, I had a great relationship with my parents because my older sibling, I learned all the buttons that they pushed, and I just didn't do the things that my older sibling did, so I got along great with my parents. Whereas if they were the older sibling, the parents didn't necessarily know what the buttons were. They didn't know where the limits were, and so there is a lot of, I remember Lexi and I used to have this conversation. I'm like, because I would say to you, I don't know, I've never had a 13-year-old daughter before, so we're just figuring this out together. And so I don't think you liked that answer ever,
No.
ever. And the only person that liked it less is when Lexi, I would say to her, I don't know. I had a 13-year-old daughter. I tried this thing. It doesn't work with you. I don't know. We're going to figure this out together. And I, she did not, I'm not Sammy.
Yeah,
And
it's
I'm
like the
like,
big response was, I'm not Sammy.
I'm not trying to say, I'm trying to say I have some coping skills, and I'm just trying to use the tools in my tool belt, and it's not working, and I don't know what else to use. So help me out here. Help me figure out how I can make you understand. How can I be more clear in what I'm trying to say? How can I communicate that I do love you? You are enough. All of those.
Even though you might be being ridiculous right now.
Gosh. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I did actually. I can remember, like, I hate you. Words. Just words. I don't have to make them mean anything.
I feel like my like second generation of that is, wow, those are some really big feelings you've got right now. um that must be some really big feelings to make you feel like you want to hit me and scream at me and say that you hate me. That must be really hard for your body to deal with right now, which I think my son is getting pretty annoyed with. Is me being like, wow, those are some big feelings.
Yeah,
They
I can't wait till like he's 13 and he'll be like, stop it.
stop telling me I have big feelings. Be like, well, you're exhibiting my point by having these big feelings. So,
Well, and while we're talking about children, that is also another coping skill that I would say, if all else fails, we do often have to reparent ourselves, because most of us were raised by humans who didn't have the benefit of all of this emotional intelligence, all this emotional resilience. didn't have communication degrees, didn't have therapy degrees, all of those things. And
Or
so
even if they did, they were doing the best that they could at the
they were
moment.
doing the best that they could. And the things that, like, I mean, if you read about, like, in the 1950s, John Bowlby, who is one of the early studiers of attachments, he studied that in the 1950s, it was okay for kids to be sick in the hospital and parents to see them once a week. That was the norm. That was socially accepted. You went and saw your kids one time per week. We don't do that anymore. Right?
Right now, your kid is born, and if you don't want them to stay in the room with you, you have to request that your kid be taken to the nursery because the default will very likely be that they stay with you. So,
Right.
even like the opposite, which is not to say like any type of judgment on either or, it's just the
Well, no,
default.
but like we now know better. We know that that is very traumatizing for children to be in a medical environment without their parents.
Yeah.
That's traumatizing. So, not only for the parent, but for the kid. And so we've learned better and now we do better. And so, and they were doing the best they could.
And I think that sometimes for me, when I think about reparenting myself or to encourage others who you're like, I don't even know, I've not done this before. Sometimes it's if you were a 3-year old dealing with the same thing, what would you say to yourself? Would you say, oh my gosh, you're gonna like, I can't believe that you did this horrible thing. What's wrong with you? You're this horrible person. And it can be, no, we make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. I actually saw a really funny TikTok recently that said somebody who is, this is sort of related, I promise. How he becomes a better parent is sometimes he will roast himself in his head when he wants to get mad at his kids, and it'll be like, oh, big man gonna yell at a 3-year-old for spilling his milk again. Does that make you feel good about yourself? Yelling at the 3-year-old? Look at you. And there is something about that though, that like you really wouldn't in your best state. How would you treat your small child? You would say, we all make mistakes and it's okay. And I love you and I'm always going to love you and I'm going to be there for you. And so think about, what would you say to like the most precious child in their most precious moment, specifically, not their worst moment, not the moment you're going to put them on the sidewalk with a sign that says free, the precious moment. What would you say to them? And then say that to yourself. How can you be gentle to yourself in that way?
I also, in the book, you'll notice I give a couple of examples of doing that with a younger child, imagining it not your own child, because there are times when it could be hard because your child being a child feels like a reflection on yourself. And so I offer the example of if your coworker's child was, out on a snow day and they were sitting, they had to come to the office, and at lunchtime they were telling you this story, would you be like, "Ah, whiny baby, suck it up, buttercup"? No, because you're not going to treat your friend's kid, your coworker's kid, like that. So I'd agree with you, the precious child. If it's not your own precious child, think of it as, or a niece or nephew. Oftentimes they are more adorable to us because we don't have to put up with their least happy times.
Or
Anyway,
even like your friends' kids. I will say, just personally, one of my favorite relationships to watch right now is our college friends developing a relationship and a friendship with our toddlers. And so even that, like where it's so far removed. There's no DNA genetic tie. There is
yeah.
only a choice to be in this relationship. And that child, what would you say to them? You would never say, like, get over yourself. You're fine. People have bigger problems. Stop crying right now. Like, we're going to be kind and gentle and say, do you need a hug? How can I be there for you? Do you want somebody to just sit with you for a little bit?
Sorry, I was just thinking about like people who's, oh, my sister's kid. Oh, they need to be told, grow up, suck it up, buttercup. Like, okay, so I like your idea. The last coping skill I want to talk about is forgiveness. There are going to be times people are going to disappoint you, they're going to hurt you, they're going to, you know, not be trustworthy, all the things. And forgiveness is not a one and done. Forgiveness is not a completely releasing them from all responsibility necessarily. Forgiveness is about releasing yourself from the need to be right, for the need for justice. It is absolutely about forgiving the person for doing the thing that you had to suffer consequences, whether that was hurt feelings or worse. One of the things that I think is an interesting on my own forgiveness journey is that I wasn't able, some of the pain that I had to forgive, I wasn't able to forgive it once. I had experienced it where every time I reacted or had a consequence because of the way somebody else had wronged me, then I had to forgive them that I had to deal with a consequence, right? I want to be the kind of person that is open and trustworthy or trusting. And if I am standoffish and I don't trust a new person, and it's because somebody else has hurt me, I might have to forgive that person at that moment when I am not being the kind of person. I had some abuse as a child, and whenever my husband would touch me in the early years, I would like flinch. Every time I flinched, I would have to forgive the person that had touched me inappropriately. And so that forgiveness work can also help reduce the triggers, which can also help reduce the emotional activation, which can also help improve your relationships. And also when you walk around with a scorecard holding everybody to holding a grudge against all the things that anyone has ever done to you, it's just also not going to be conducive to forming solid relationships with people.
I will also just admit I have had a hard time going through some forgiveness work on my own and have sought out professionals to support me through that. So if you're also in a similar camp where it's like, golly, forgiving somebody for this thing, maybe I can acknowledge the benefits of forgiveness, and yet I don't know how to get there. You're not alone, and that makes sense. And also, it doesn't mean that it's not worth it to explore that path, because it is a really freeing and healing step to take. It doesn't have to be taken alone, and it doesn't have to be
years and years of therapy.
Yeah, doesn't have to be years and years of therapy. And yeah, it's worth it.
100%.
Even if it feels like it sucks, it's worth it. So I had one other thought I wanted to add in. It's a little bit different than coping skills when we think about relationships with others. I think that coping skills almost addresses like some triage of like when things aren't going well with the relationships you have. If you're maybe on the other side where you're like, I would love to need to use these coping skills with some relationships. I don't know how to make these relationships and make these friendships. We aren't going to talk about that today because last year we talked about it in episodes 62 and 63 of the podcast, How to Make Friends as an Adult, and whatever the part 2 of that one was called. But listen to those 2 episodes. We talk a lot about strategies on making relationships, how do you maintain relationships, and what does that look like when you're not a 7-year-old who can just walk up to somebody on the playground and say, hey, do you want to be my best friend? And when you're in your adult years and it's just somehow feels more complicated. So I want to acknowledge that like there are some of us that have that longing for that community and those relationships, and even would maybe facetiously say, I wish I could use these coping skills for the opportunity to practice the coping skills. Would love to encourage you to go back and listen to those episodes. We'll put them in the show notes as well, because they were some of our top listened to episodes of 2023. So check them out. I think they're still really, really good.
100%.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today. And until next time, I hope you guys go be freaking awesome.